think that's like my cue. It's like, yo, get off. so, and I don't know, where's Tanya? Tanya, do you AM, PM, is it with or without dots? That was one of my mistakes. There you go. So, and usually because AM, PM, we're like, you know what, I don't got time for the periods or dots. I'm just going to AM, PM. Everybody makes sense of that. So, that's all I got. Hopefully you don't correct yours. It's like, oh, he said this, he said that. So, here you go. Take it away.
All right, hello? Hello, everyone. There's always an adjustment period for that. No matter how many times I do this, I never get better with it. Open up your Bibles to Matthew 5. That's where we're at. We're continuing our series. Last week, we left off on a bittersweet truth about marriage and divorce. Now, can we all at least agree that for me, that was a difficult task, to cover all of marriage and divorce in one sermon, because there's so much to cover, to clarify, to elevate and build up. So it wasn't meant to be a completely comprehensive view of marriage and divorce, but there were so many engaging conversations after youth last week that I got really, really sad after, because I realized that in our church at least, we haven't talked very much about marriage and divorce. In fact, I could probably ask you guys directly, and you know that I usually do, but I'm not going to pick on anyone right now, but in my experience, on hearing on marriage and divorce, usually it's either at Sachitanya or at Chlenskaya. There's like, at Sachitanya, that's not a good time to like really dig into a lot of these themes and problems and nuances of marriage and divorce. But especially it's terrible at Chlenskaya. But I digress. I had my opportunity. But I'm going to take a chance today to kind of clarify some things and kind of do a summary of last week, because again, this topic is so heavy and just so full of stuff, and people had questions, and I didn't know what to say to some of them, but let's just dig into it a little bit. We haven't seen good teaching about any of this, and we haven't seen good, strong, God-honoring marriages sometimes in our homes. And even the principles of marriage and divorce are poorly displayed in our books, our TV shows, our social media, and everything else. And so it's kind of hard for us to pinpoint exactly where things go wrong, but my entire emphasis last week was that, or at least I should say my intention wasn't for you to lose excitement for marriage, okay? Or to scare you off about marriage and like the dark, ugly side of divorce. It was actually quite the opposite. I was trying to elevate marriage to the point where we're not so easily fighting and having these frivolous divorces, like these trivial issues in our marriages, because we've put into perspective God's beautiful design for marriage, His supernatural design for it, the union between a man and a woman, and the reflection of His greater purpose behind it, which is Christ's relationship with the church. And so I was shocked to hear that people were discouraged about marriage or entering into marriage, that they were boasting and like, maybe I have the gift of singleness or something like that. But again, in my experience, I've never met anyone who has that gift. It is a very specific thing, and you might think you have it, but I doubt it. But I beg you, don't hold on to this pessimistic view of marriage. There's more than likely something in your heart that causes you to think that that you wouldn't be a good fit for somebody. And that's, I think, why we emphasize so much on individual preparation before marriage, things you can do to develop your character and your ideologies and how you communicate, and all these things can be worked into you. But so many times people just rush into this thing because we don't understand the weight, the magnitude of what God designed for marriage. So if you're a constant burden to the people around you, that's not an idea that you should never get married. Is that you've got a lot of work to do, okay? It's a little plug for those of you who haven't been in Dennis's group of young guys, at least. The girls tend to be a lot better at this. I'm getting head shakes for some of the guys. Maybe I'm wrong, but even in the difficulties of marriage and the hardships, there's so much beauty in not the self-serving aspect of what we think marriage is about, but in the sacrificial part of it, where two people can endure and enjoy sacrificing for one another, sharing in the battle, having this closer intimacy that you can have with nobody else in this world. A husband and a wife can share in everything, the good and the bad, as they carry out God's redemptive story through the display of your marriage. And it's something that needs to be worked in us before we step into marriage, obviously. And what I was doing last week is I was painting this picture of the Old Testament where historically women have not had it good. And that's why it sounded a little bit skewed. I wasn't just trying to protect the guys and be gentle with the guys and be like, oh, the women were treated as bargaining chips. And in the Old Testament, in the curse, there was this moment where God clearly defined what the woman is going to struggle with her whole life. And it's not just the pain in childbearing, it's this drive in her to usurp her husband in the role of leadership. And someone immediately came up and was like, well, Stan, you can say that, and that's true, it's there, but it doesn't sound good. You got to be gentle with this kind of thing. And what I wanted to say or clarify here is that even though that's true, even though you ladies will struggle with that, the guys actually have it much, much worse. Because not only are they put by God as the head of her to restrain her and lead her in a loving, caring way, he is responsible for all of the kids, okay? God's not going to ask her. God's going to ask him. What went wrong? Well, maybe not like that drastic, but we're exposed to this pattern so that we can better see where the conflicts are going to arise. And the emphasis is this, that we are equal in the eyes of God. Just as God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all equal, but they carry out different tasks. They have different roles. Likewise, the man and the woman have different roles in the marriage. It's not that the Spirit is humiliated that God gets to be this and Jesus gets to be the redeeming Savior. It's not that kind of marriage that we're supposed to have, man and woman, where it's like, oh, she submits, so she's, oh, it's such a shame that she's the weaker vessel or anything like that. Again, we've missed the point. There are roles that help keep order and unity, and there's so much imagery in this. And so, actually, for the girls, too, this, no wonder you can't find your Proverbs 1 through 30 man. Who's gonna get that standard of Christ dying for the church, his bride? And so sometimes ladies will just, all right, I haven't found him, so now I'm going to settle. And it is a scary thing, both this pressure to jump into it, but also this, like, if I'm too picky or, like, this isn't Jesus, like, something about him, like, there's so much going on here. And I want to, again, just emphasize that there's this idea, or even like last week when I was talking so much about divorce, like, it isn't the end-all sin to divorce somebody. Yes, it's terrible and it happens, and God even had provisions for it, but I don't want us to think that, like, this is the most terrible thing you can ever do in your life, even though it is ugly and it's not an option in God's eyes, because what happened when you were married is that you became one. There's this supernatural bond that happened that nothing can separate. And what Jesus was trying to do in Matthew 5 is prevent more people from just, oh, my wife didn't cook right, so I'm signing the papers, sending her away, and now anyone she finds after that will be committing adultery, because in God's eyes, that divorce is not official. That is not legal. God doesn't want divorce. And so if we imagine marriage this way, where we can just at any point pull a plug, then it doesn't portray God's marriage with us when he redeemed and saved you. Imagine in this kind of Christianity that's so many times like taught to us, where you're baptized, right? And you're this newborn walking in newness of life, and then you're taught right away, like, you got to dress this way, eat this way, talk like this, and do all these things, or else God is going to, like, judge you and break you, and, you know, like, God's not going to care for you if you don't love him enough, or these kind of things, like if you don't dress the right way or whatever else. And so this idea of God saving you and almost like holding it over you, like, it's been so much of what I've heard about Christianity, and marriage isn't this way. God didn't save you that way, where if you mess up, sure, you're done. Go in your penalty box until you're ready to be with me again. That's not the idea of marriage or God's salvation. Oh man, I feel like, and then next week I'm going to have to clarify another 20 things, but the idea here, even, and I wanted to clarify it too, with like the idea of what do we do when there's abuse in a marriage. And I emphasize that you can get away. You have a right and actually the duty to protect your kids, yourself. But have we forgotten the process of dealing with sin? That God has made marriage this partnership of accountability as well, where wives, your duty is to call out your husband in sin. And if he disagrees and rejects it and continues in his ways, what is the next step? We go to a witness or two who are familiar with us and all these things. And again, if he refuses to change, there's this process, this designed for accountability and discipline. And what happens is that the church is so prideful, so embarrassed by this sin, that we lose all principles that we've learned in the Bible, and we start doing our own thing. We start protecting where we're not supposed to protect. We start lying or deceiving ourselves even. And so there's a lot we misunderstand and misconstrued, and that's why it's so important that Jesus addresses the legalistic Christianity that even us, like now knowing like all of this information, tend to fall into. Man, I can make the whole sermon about this. I'm just going to skip ahead because I'm scared. Wow, that's a lot. Okay. I always learn on the spot. I'm like a goldfish. I never remember from previous weeks the terrible mistakes I made. But essentially what I'm saying is that there's a greater stake here. Okay, this isn't a simple matter of signing papers or this is uncomfortable and so I'm going to not deal with this. God is calling us to die to our sins, to expose our sins, even in our marriages, in our pride, in everything. He's exposing us by this interpretation of the law where we minimize the law and its weight. He's saying, no, this is meant to shine a light on the darkness of your sin and expose it so that you may be spared by the cleansing of Christ. Unfortunately, last week I didn't get into odes, and I don't mean oats. You guys know that I struggle with this pronunciation. So many people came up and were like, did you mean like boats or like all this stuff? No, I'm saying odes as in swearing by something. And what I'm talking about is this kind of natural progression. We think like the Sermon on the Mount is like kind of here and there, but there's this moment-to-moment kind of thing where I actually found it funny that Jesus like talks about divorce, take marriage seriously. Then he talks about, it's like keep your promises. And then he's like, retaliation. Like, something happened there where, like, there's a need to address retaliation right after this whole dilemma of marriage and divorce and keeping your word. And so I don't know who this was geared to. Maybe when this was, like, written, it was, like, kept in mind. I don't fully know. But we're going to get into odes and retaliation today. And like I was saying last week, in my childhood, I would use and abuse the phrase, честно перед Богом. I don't know what today's version of that is, but if I had to venture to guess, I would think it's something like, no cap. Bet. Well, maybe bet's a little bit different, but I've even heard non-Christians tell me, or even say just all the time, it's like a phrase. They'll say something and they'll be like, on God. And I think that's more of our version of that. But like, it's such a paradox that these people in their rap songs are saying this. Like, okay, like God doesn't care about your like possessions and all this stuff. But anyway, all of us speak irreverently about God and things of God. And even when I don't want to say we, but when people say, oh my God, in vain, we don't even register in our minds that we're blaspheming against God, using his name in vain. And blaspheme means to speak irreverently about God or sacred things. And so, again, this theme of don't take this thing lightly, where it was with marriage, that bond, same thing with our words. There's a bond made when we talk about God, when we swear, when we even use our tongue to either build up or destroy. So in Matthew 5, verse 33, I'm going to read it to you. You can follow along. Matthew 5, verse 33 says, again, and Jesus is going through these antitheses. Again, you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. This is relevant to you, where you might have thought, like, how is divorce relevant to me? And I want to get into why here a little bit. If marriage requires some kind of order and certificates in all kinds of circumstances, divorce only in one circumstance where there's fornication adultery, there is also an order and a place for making oaths. Think about in courtrooms, in the line of duty for police or military. In marriage vows, there's actually oaths taken. Some of you nurses or doctors, what oath do you have to take when you're stepping into the field? If some of you guys don't know, I'm worried, but I think it's the Hippocratic Oath. Am I right? Something like that. So are you as a Christian allowed to take that oath if Jesus here is saying don't take oaths at all? Are we allowed to make pinky promises? The most important end-all kind of promise. Let me tell you why this applies to you, even if you're not in that kind of field. If you're not a politician and you never have to worry about that kind of thing. One, we all speak. And if one speaks, there is either truth or there is falsehood. And two, we all make commitments. And so how do we distinguish when it comes to important matters, what is the truth? What is the level of commitment a person has made? And the irony is not lost on me about politicians, by the way, when they're like in the middle of being accused of like indecency or a crime, they're being sworn in. And even in courtrooms, like the paradox of this is like you'll see an evil person clearly, and they're brought up as a witness. And what we make them do is put their hand on a Bible and swear that they're going to tell the truth. Like we're talking about a criminal. Like if we had Barabbas over here and we gave him a Bible and like, did you do these crimes? Like this guy who was repeatedly in prison. That's what's going on here is people tend to lie. There's nobody credible. And so we need something in place in our courts or in a marriage or, when you're going to sign up to save people's lives, we have to take an oath that we're going to actually do it and follow through. That we're not going to refuse treatment. Why is this important? Truth to God. He even fits it into his 10 commandments that you should not, or thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not lie, to say things that are untrue about people or anything about yourself even. Otherwise, people tend to not trust you. And the standard for truth becomes diminished. It's a world of confusion and blurred lines. Even our parents sometimes lie to us. I remember when I would hear stories about Logan Paul this and he took this much money from these people, and I'm like, seriously? You didn't see that coming from the pattern of sins, like all these crypto, whatever. I cannot tell you how up the wall I was being sent, thinking about one after the other of these cases of corruption and people lying and people buying into it again. And I'm like, maybe there is some kind of standard of truth, but I'm not seeing it. And even women, ladies, you're entrusting your lives to guys who call their mom yo. I've seen it. People who are not credible, we almost worship them because they have something. And the world is becoming filled with people who have no loyalty to the truth. Guys telling girls that they'll do whatever it takes to make them happy. Or people putting up images on social media or in the church of perfection. The most flattering things that we have. How about when guys buy a prior salvage car that's like luxury brand, and then they pretend like they're the next Bill Gates. They have machina. Do we not use lying and flattery, deception in our day-to-day lives? Tanya, where's Tanya? Lapshana. Okay. Some people know. Oh, there she is. They sit further. Tanya, you teach children. Are they innocent angels who are always candid and truthful? Oh. Yikes. 5 years old or 5 girls? 6 girls. Wow. Okay, so it starts young. This pattern. Why is that? Because later we see that Satan is actually the father of lies. And if we are not belonging to Christ, then we are children of Satan. And it is easy for us to lie and to not feel guilt. We're born as liars. We live under this dominion. We blur the truth. We exaggerate. We fail to keep our word. We make millions of excuses. We plagiarize. We hide the other half of the truth. We're fake with our friends. We're fake with our parents. And we sink into this abyss where we don't even know what the truth is anymore. We become hypocrites judging others when we lie to ourselves about our own sin. One of the biggest lies we tell is in the 2 little words, I do. And we haven't considered that, through health and sickness, through riches and poverty. And when we're calling God into this whole mix, before God and these witnesses, I promise to do this. We're basically invoking God to attest to the validity, the authenticity of our words, our commitment. And we're saying, basically, according to the law, that if we don't fulfill them, we're inviting God to take vengeance on us. That He has every right to call upon our words that we said, the commitment that we made, and to bear the punishment that He deems fit. There was a film years ago, I'm not that old, years ago, called The Invention of Lying, where or at least I didn't think it was a good movie. They go way out of whatever, but it was really easy for me to see what a world where there was only truth could look like. And like even in the trailer, this guy comes to the woman's door. They're gonna go on a date, and he asks, "Hey, how are you?" And she's like, "Well, I'm a little sad now, depressed actually. Like, in the pictures, you look more handsome." And they go on this date, and they're being super polite and honest, and the waiter comes over with his drinks, and he's like, "I'm going to be honest, I took a little sip of that." And then she's on the phone later because her mom calls during this date, and she's like, "Yeah, I see him right now. He's nice, but he's kind of fat." And I'm watching this, and like I immediately like realized like what it would be like if in a world we could only tell truth and the whole truth. Nothing would be hidden from the other person. There would be no fakeness. By the way, later he says like, "She's out of your league." And like it hurt deep. Because like when I was saying like marriage, like there's, we want to emphasize the highlights, the good stuff, like accountability and encouragement and all this stuff. And I thought to myself like too, like, they help you with your style, like instantly. They help you with your approach to people. Like they help you smile when you're supposed to. And it's just really sad that like we think of marriage as like, oh, do this, do this, do this. But it's meant to be like, this is what you should be like. This is what you should improve on. And if we lived in a world where everything was honesty all the time, imagine how improved we would be. I know that you are mean to your wife. Cut it out. I know that you cheated on your taxes. God hates that. I know that you're lying. You did this. Can you imagine that world? We would never second guess people's intentions. We wouldn't have so much showboating. How easy it would be to pass laws and even to raise children. Although with that, there would be very uncomfortable situations when they ask, "Where did I come from?" Or games of mafia, they wouldn't work anymore, you know. So it'd be there'd be downsides, I should say. But what Jesus is saying here and getting to is, don't take this lightly, frivolous. This is not trivial when you swear by something, even just speaking. And what the Pharisees and scribes were doing, they were so used to incorporating this aspect of promises, vows, because they were dishonest, or people were dishonest. And so to validify people's word, they would just, "Oh yeah, I swear it, I promise." Like adding this here and there, not caring about its weight. We fail to uphold our word in peace treaties, on our IDs. How many of you have ever actually read the terms and service of an application or product that you're using? Basa. Okay, wow, we got some. Okay, have you read every terms and service that you've ever? Wow, okay. Okay, what about... You're right, that one you need to read, but like when you sign up to use Apple iPhone, there's like all kinds of agreements that you got to read through. None of us, really, none of us. I'm not telling you like you got to go read every word for word and understand it, but when you click OK, I have read and accept these terms and conditions, you are saying, this is the truth. I am committing, I am saying this. And then later when I find out that there's like some hidden script there that I didn't know, I never read that. Like, do you see the problem here? And I think Satan is in the details where he gets us with this fine print where we don't even register that we have lied. But there is a need for oaths. God made it so. God himself made oaths back in the Old Testament. Jesus spoke, or Paul too, in testimony, they called on oaths before God. Because men need something to hold us to our word, and we subject ourselves to what is standard, right? But we don't just emptily use it everywhere, any chance we can. Or instead, what this text actually says is like, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Anything more than this comes from evil. Meaning anything more, if you're always just saying this and that, you're basically revealing that you have a heart that is dishonest and that you need to cover it up with some kind of grand oath, grand gesture, promise, or whatever else it is. And so in your language, your day-to-day conversations, do not be using oaths and promises or taking even your simple words lightly. Because God is in everything. He is in heaven. He is in earth. Man, that sounds weird. Okay. Do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make a single hair gray or white. You cannot do anything. You have no control here. God is in everything. God hears it whether you say, I promise, or if you don't. He is there. He is always watching for truthfulness. He always intended for there to be integrity, both in marriage and here in oaths and promises, in our word that we keep, lest we come under judgment by him. The tongue can destroy. It corrupts the entire body. If we go through James, it sets ablaze the entire path of your life if you're not careful. It can destroy cities. And so when we read in Numbers 30, if a man vows a vow to the Lord and swears an oath to bind his soul with that bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that has proceeded out of his mouth. That there's this bondage that happens when you swear by God that something is true. Everything that proceeds out of your mouth is thereby bonded. Paul in Romans 9 says, I speak the truth in Christ, I lie not, the Holy Spirit bearing me witness. I don't think Paul would ever be a person to take lightly this phraseology. And so there is a time for oaths. When you do get married, you're allowed to, as a Christian, to make a vow. You can also choose not to make a vow. Is that controversial? But, okay, think about it too. Like, there's so much humiliation in that people would be like, huh? What's going on? Not going to be faithful? No, but if we think about Adam and Eve, there wasn't a ceremony where they promised, oh, I'm going to love you. No. We do that because, yes, it's a good thing to make your commitments, but if it's not taken seriously, and my coworkers, the way they talk about marriage is like this is their enemy. Not just even their first or third marriage. It's so bad. It's like, man, they took this and this from me, or my time, or I regret this and that. And I remember thinking about, like, it's such a ugly way to view marriage, and yet they go into it again and again like it's nothing. There's a time and a place where it's necessary and acceptable. But if your word is suspect every time you speak, then you've messed up somewhere along the way. You're misusing this. You're not living up to Jesus' kingdom standards that he's trying to teach here. And so let your yes be yes and your no be no. And the other side of this too, I'll just say shortly, is the Pharisees and scribes were also like, oh, technically I didn't like invoke God's name. I said, I swear by Jerusalem. So I'm not like, there's no bond here for me. Or I swear by like my head. Or this one always puzzled me, like when people swear by people who have died. I swear on my mother's grave I didn't do this. Like, why would you do that, first of all? And also, like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't know. Or, like, never swear on your firstborn child. Like, what is happening with our swearing? Something has gone wrong along the way. But they were misinterpreting the law where it's like, oh, technically. And Jesus is like, there's no technicality here. Anything you say is under God's scrutiny. And so for the religious elitists like you guys have completely messed up, go back to Genesis 2 like I was talking about last week. It's like saying almost like, oh, I promised this and that, and then behind your hand you're crossing your fingers. That's the equivalent of this, like, oh, technically, like, it's pointless, it's mute, it's nothing. So then, you guys know me. There's a complicated question that arises. Ethical dilemmas of sorts. What if Herod was commanding you as a newfound Christian to go and murder anyone under 2 years old? Would you be able to lie then? Or if you were hiding refugees in your basement and the government came and asked if you're hiding anyone, would you lie then? Good question, Stan. Let's move on. What I'll say with that, and I think it has more to do with the conscience and how we have certain rights as Christians where we're not subject to the law in the same way. But what I want to say here is that God is primarily concerned with your heart. And out of it flow deceit and lies and all these things. Not so much about the external works that you do, but the inner heart that is defiled, bringing out more defilement. This revelation of anything more comes from evil. All right, I'm going to go ahead. Man, can I do it next week, retaliation? This is so hard. Well, let's at least read it. I don't know. Retaliation. What'd you say? Somebody save me. All right, I'll be quick. Verse 38, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. That's pretty easy, but you know me, I'm going to complicate it a little bit. Retaliation is built in by God, like this very thing. Or no, wow, that sounds really wrong. God did not build in retaliation in you. We tend to have a habit, the small, annoying little thing where when we're wronged, we are spiteful. we dial up the little knob to 11 when we're wronged. We're petty. There's 4 John Wick movies. It's a story about revenge. I was shocked when I found out. Just murder spree of unfathomable degrees, and it's about revenge. Even when we grew up, what did we watch? Code Leopold with his nemesises, and Tom and Jerry, and Mousetrap, and Parent Trap. And there were all these, man, they're all related to mice and cats. Home Alone, like, that was spiteful what he was doing. Huh? Trespassing, well, yeah, yeah. But anyway, not only were we born into this, but we have cultivated it. We glorify the people who take nothing from nobody, that take sweet, satisfying justice into their hands, and we live vicariously through them. But God tells us, no, vengeance is mine and mine alone. It's not in your hands. So let go of that birthday party where someone didn't show up. Some of you hold grudges from family game nights 15 years ago. I was reading about Athens, how people would write down once a year someone's name, and if enough people wrote down that name, that person was to flee, or else they would be either imprisoned or killed. That's petty. Imagine you're just the guy who accidentally burned the crops, and everyone writes down your name. We think that retaliation is giving somebody the silent treatment or not liking their post. But worse, we take it to another level where we gossip and slander. We justify sinful behaviors in the name of feeling better. We humiliate them. We yell at them. We won't pass them a ball at volleyball because we're so caught up in our own, I was wronged, so therefore I don't like. And this phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, means not just go to your neighbor and if they scratched your car, you go to their car and you're like, oh, okay, tell me when. We're even. That's not it. This eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, this was meant to be in the courtroom, whereas judge decides what is the damage that you are going to pay in order to compensate this person for knocking out their tooth. You're going to pay a tooth worth amount. That's weird. But it was basically driving this idea that the punishment should fit the crime. Not like lawsuits today where I stubbed your toe and now I owe you $1 million for emotional damage. Our court system is messed up. We should not be dealing with millions of dollars for emotional damage. Punishment must fit the crime. And so, if somebody were to rob me or hurt me, interpersonally, I am required to love them and forgive them. To not just that would be too easy. I would give them more than they asked for. But when it comes to the court of law, I give them this, I feed them if they need it, and then I send them to the police. and deal with it in court. Because they have committed a crime, and God has set in motion on our earth to keep things civil, courts, judges, police, all of these things in place so that there would be order and civility and a demonstration that when you break a law, there is punishment. And there's this parallel that God's law has been broken, and so we don't believe in hell, but we can do whatever we want. But God demonstrates that there will be punishment for breaking the law. And so, yes, it is your duty. I don't care what people say that snitches get stitches. Your duty is to follow the law. If your neighbor is doing something, your brother is doing something they should not be doing, it is your duty to call it out. Because God's law has been set. And if we live without consequences, what happens to our world? Drive-through guy put pickles in your sandwich. You don't go to him and put pickles in his lunch. Some of you have, or what? We don't agree with that one. Okay. What about with marriages? This one-upmanship. It's the passive-aggressive Slavic way of dealing with things. Getting even. Having the upper hand. Speaking of hands, how would you like to, for stealing something, lose a hand? What if we lived under that regime? Punishment doesn't fit the crime, does it? There needs to be some kind of order, consequences, this illustration of what God has instilled, that it's not your duty to go on a vendetta or be a vigilante like we celebrate in the movies. It's to leave it to the courts and to submit yourself, and all the while not to make excuses and hate that person and complain every step of the way and bring other people into it and humiliate them and bring it up on social media. No, none of that. As a Christian, give them more than they ask. If they found wrong in you, let me tell you this. I am shocked that some of you don't understand what a hit and run is. And that you, if you don't even know it, but you would be okay with denting someone's car and taking off. I know multiple Christians who have done that. And what's not okay is that Jesus is saying here, instead of waiting there and talking to them, or not even leaving a note, you wait there with cash in hand. You offer them everything. Hey, this is the kind of image he's portraying here. You're going to love your enemy. You're going to give generously. You're going to subject yourself, even if it's embarrassing or uncomfortable or whatever else. Make it right so that they hold nothing against you. That's what the Beatitudes were building up. This is the kind of kingdom of heaven that I have. And you aren't just visiting, you're becoming part of that. You are held to the same standards. Standard of love. We got more time? All right, I don't know. So a couple of these are kind of confusing. I'll just explain them shortly too, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. There was a guy who was actually saying, I was reading this commentary where he's like, the Bible tells me that I have to offer you my other cheek, but it doesn't specify after that what I'm allowed to do. which is the wrong take. Granted, that's the wrong take. Like, Jesus isn't just saying that. He's saying, when you become a Christian, your rights are different than what they were before. You have died to self. You are no longer your own person, your own kingdom, your own everything. And so when Jesus gives this example of being reviled, spit on, whipped, carrying his own cross in front of his mother, in front of everyone in a humiliating fashion, he says, likewise, be like me, imitate me, love them, and on the cross, as you're giving your dying breath, ask that God would forgive them as I forgave them. That's the idea. And if they sue you and take your tunic, give them your cloak. The cloak was like this thing that you would keep warm in, because Jerusalem is pretty high up. And you would be able to retain that cloak when you're suing somebody to demonstrate their ability to pay it back with all kinds of, like, it's a whole complicated thing. But cloak is important, okay? You only had maybe one or two of them, unless you're rich. And so he's saying, don't just give them the tunic that they're suing you for, that would be right. Give them more. Invite them into your home. I heard, like, this whole thing about homosexuality, right? It is hated in our community, and I understand that. It is a sin, but it is not the greatest sin ever. And I heard testimonies of people who would, instead of like, hi, gay neighbor, you're doing this wrong and that wrong, and like, I love you, but like, stop. That's not the approach. And instead, what they did is they invited them to their home and ate with them, built relationships with them, showed them how they commune, how they spend time, how they talk, all these things. And those sinners, just like the ones that ate with Jesus, and the reason people hated Jesus, just like that, they were converted, brought into the faith. They changed their mind. And so the approach here is so fundamentally different to what we're used to. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Imagine there's war, right? And a militia comes and they have a right to make you carry their stuff for up to 1 mile. Jesus says, carry it for 2. Carry it all the way. Your enemy, the same person who is persecuting your family and all Christians that you know, carry for them their things, their weapons of destruction. That's the contrast. That's the difference. Love those who persecute you. And I think furthermore, too, there was like couriers. They would be able to stop you somewhere and be like, hey, I'm not feeling well enough today. Take this and deliver it to Jerusalem. And you would have to do it by law. So like imagine you're going to work and you're told to go all the way back to Mankato or something. And you would not complain. Instead, you'd be like, all right, you got any other packages? That's the idea. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. I'm going to call up the worship team. I'm sorry. We're getting there. Guys, by the way, like the Bible is so like rich in lessons. And I want to elevate like how much is fit into just this. that we would fundamentally change the way we see our neighbor, and not just our neighbor, but the one who hates us. That the standard for our righteousness would be so elevated that people would see our marriages and be like, what is going on? What are they on? How do they forgive so freely? How do they love so passionately that they would bear all things? Even with adultery, they still forgive one another and decide to pursue it. They give generously. They don't beg for anything. And this is dealing with, like, there was a lot of need back in the day. It wasn't like just give whatever, like, oh, here and there. Like, if I see that my neighbor needs something, he doesn't even have to ask. I'm going to go and offer it. Not collect all the possessions that I can carry to heaven. No, but that I would willingly give more than I'm even asked to. Sorry, I didn't give them a cue to play the music, but I have more, but I don't care. I mean, I do care, but I don't know if you guys might care, but I pray that we would elevate the commitments we keep, the marriages we have, like even just the simple words we use. Let it be yes and no. Let us not stray into this idea that we need so much to survive and to prosper. God has given us everything that we already need and more. And so we must just subject ourselves to Him and let Him lead us. It will be hard to love, it'll be hard to forgive, but that is the calling that Christ has for you, so that you can see the beautiful picture of what heaven will be like. Let's sing.